In today's video, I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of the 90-word question in the Gcse Spanish writing exam and talking through a model text for the education topic. If you're not familiar with the 90-word question, I've put a link in the description box to a recent video I made giving lots of tips to get top marks for this question. So let's have a look at the question we're going to be working through today. It says, ¿Tienes una nueva amiga chilena? Te ha mandado unas preguntas sobre tu instituto. So you've got a new Chilean friend and she has sent you some questions about your school. Escríbele un email. Write her an email. Mention, and then we've got our 4 bullet points. The first one is, ¿Qué hiciste en tus clases de español la semana pasada? What did you do in your Spanish classes last week? Tu opinión sobre las normas en tu instituto. Your opinion about rules at your school or in your school. The third bullet point, ¿Qué haces durante el recreo? What do you do during break time? And the fourth bullet point, ¿Qué te gustaría estudiar en el futuro? What would you like to study in the future? So there will normally be one bullet point that refers to or would like a past tense response. So that's our first bullet point in this case, where it says, what did you do in your Spanish lessons last week? There's normally one bullet point that would like you to give your opinion about something. So that's a second bullet point in this case, which is your opinion about rules at school. And there's normally another bullet point which would like a future tense response. And in this case, it's bullet point 4, which is, what would you like to study in the future? So before I start, what I will always do at the top of my sheet on next to the bullet points is I will just form this little checklist that I can tick off throughout. So we've got past time frame or past tenses, future time frames, so the future tenses, so that could be the future simple, or it could be the near future, or it could be the conditional tense. Again, I'll just put a link in the description box to a video which discusses all the different tenses you need in your GCSE Spanish exams. And then we've got developed opinions, so that's things like, I like this because it is, so just giving a reason for your opinions. We've got complex structures, which tend to be sentences which are developed and extended. And then we've got some show-off structures. Again, I'll put a link in the description box with lots of examples of show-off structures. So let's start off by looking at a model answer to the first bullet point. ¿Qué hiciste en tus clases de español la semana pasada? So just one thing to note before we start is that not every single bullet point and the response to each bullet point has to be completely evenly weighted. So you can write a little bit more for one bullet point and a little bit less for another. Just make sure you definitely answer each bullet point. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. La semana pasada, last week, estudié para mis exámenes durante las clases de español. I studied for my exams during the Spanish classes. Por ejemplo, estudiamos la gramática. For example, we studied grammar. Me gustó ya que fue pan comido. I liked it because, or given that, it was a piece of cake. So I've included an idiom here, which does really show off in the writing exams. And I'll just, in the description box, I'll pop a link to a video I made giving lots of examples of different idioms you can use. Si tuviera la oportunidad, if I had the opportunity, me gustaría estudiar los festivales. I would like to study festivals. Me gustaría estudiar los festivales de España. I would like to study festivals from Spain, dado que me interesa la cultura española, given that I'm interested in Spanish culture. Right, let's break down now why that response was a really good response. So if we look back at the checklist that we discussed earlier, we've got 3 past tenses in this little paragraph. We've got estudié on the top line, I studied. We've also got on the second line, estudiamos, which also means we studied. So we've got another example of a past tense. We've also got me gustó on the third line. I liked it. Again, another example of past tense. So we're really showing our knowledge of how to form the past tense. We've also actually got a future time frame there because we can see in the fourth line, me gustaría is the conditional tense. I would like. So that is an example of the conditional tense, which means you have included a future time frame. And then we've also got a couple of complex structures. We've got quite a few complex structures in there actually. Ya que on the third line is a great example of a complex structure. So you're extending that sentence by using given that, ya que, or because. So I loved it because, or given that it was a piece of cake. So that's a great example of a complex structure. We've also used dado que on that last line there. So we've extended our sentences using dado que. And in terms of a show-off structure, for me, a real show-off structure is, if you look on the third line, si tuviera la oportunidad, me gustaría, if I had the opportunity, I would like. That's an imperfect subjunctive sentence there, which is a real show-off structure in the writing and speaking exams. So that's a great one to use there. So you can see just from that first paragraph, I have made it quite a long response to that first paragraph, but I have managed to tick off quite a few things on my checklist. So let's move on to paragraph 2. And it says, tu opinión sobre las normas en tu instituto. Your opinion about the rules in your school. Okay, so again, like I was saying earlier, they don't have to be evenly weighted, and I've written a little bit more in my first two paragraphs. So we've got, en mi instituto está prohibido ser agresivo o grosero. So in my school, you are not allowed to be aggressive or rude. Y no se permite correr en los pasillos, and you are not allowed to run in the corridors. So I've just included in the first bit of that a couple of examples of some school rules, which you probably learned in your lesson. Diría que las normas son importantes y necesarias. I would say that the rules are important and necessary. So I've just given there my opinion of the school rules. I really like starting my sentences with diría que. I would say that, because actually you're putting in a future time frame there. You're saying that in the conditional tense, and it's really easy to put in at the beginning of a lot of sentences. So on the third line, I'll continue there. También se debe llevar uniforme. Also, you must wear uniform. Si fuera directora, cambiaría el uniforme, puesto que mi uniforme es rojo, pero prefiero azul. So we've got here, if I were the head teacher, I would change the uniform because my uniform is red, but I prefer blue. Right, so again, I'm going to break this paragraph down to show you why this would be a grade 9 response. If we look back at the checklist, again, we've added loads more ticks to that checklist. So we've got a few future time frames in there as well. We've got diría que, I would say that. And I've also put another conditional tense. On the fourth line, it says cambiaría, I would change, which is the conditional tense there as well. I've also added some developed opinions there. So I've said, if I were head teacher, I would change the uniform, and then I've said why. Given that, puesto que mi uniforme es rojo, my uniform is red, but I prefer blue. So I've given a developed opinion there. I've also included another show-off structure. To be honest, there's quite a few show-off structures in this paragraph here, but I really like using the imperfect subjunctive as a show-off structure, which is, if I were head teacher. So that's in that fourth line if I were head teacher. That's a great show-off structure, and that would always be followed by the conditional tense. And yeah, so that would be, again, a grade 9 response to the second paragraph. So now let's move on to the third paragraph. And it was, ¿Qué haces durante el recreo? So what do you do during break time? So as you could see from my first two paragraphs, I showed off quite a lot in those first two paragraphs, and I wrote quite a lot for the first two. So now I know that we're approaching the word count, I can make the third and fourth paragraph a little bit shorter in this case. So let's have a look at what I wrote here. Durante el recreo, during break time, suelo comer. So this means I usually eat, and suelo is a great complex structure. It's an infinitive construction, and so you will always put an infinitive comer, for example, after the suelo. And it's, like I say, it's a great way to show off. So suelo comer en la cantina, o me chifla charlar con mis amigos. So I usually eat in the canteen, or I love to chat with my friends. So looking at my checklist previously, I'm going to add a bit more future tense in there. So mañana voy a ir a la biblioteca donde se puede leer un libro o hacer los deberes. Tomorrow I'm going to go to the library where you can read a book or do homework. I really like this structure, donde se puede, where you can. It means where you can, as you can kind of put that in quite a lot of different contexts. And that is an example of a complex structure there as well. So looking back at that checklist, we've actually already put ourselves in a really good position there because most of them are pretty full. But we did add an additional future time frame there. We also added a complex structure, even though we've already got our minimum of 3, which is great, but we've really showed off our language again in this paragraph. So let's have a look at the fourth bullet point now. We have pretty much reached our word count, so we don't have to write too much for this last bit. We do have to make sure that we've definitely answered the bullet point. So, ¿qué te gustaría estudiar en el futuro? What would you like to study in the future? Cuando sea mayor, when I'm older, quisiera estudiar el español en la universidad. I would like to study Spanish at university. Dado que me gustaría vivir en España, given that I would like to live in Spain. También estudiaré francés, puesto que los idiomas me interesan mucho. Also, I will study French, given that languages interest me a lot. So let's break that paragraph down and just refer back to our checklist, which is looking pretty good at the moment. And I've just managed to add one last show-off structure, and I think a great show-off structure is cuando sea mayor, when I'm older, as it's sea is what we call a subjunctive tense, so it really does impress. And then you can see that we have completed our checklist, but I've included, because this is a future tense response bullet point, I have just showed off here on the third line, estudiaré, I will study. So we're showing off our future simple there, which is great. And we've also included lots of developed opinions and a few complex structures in there as well. Thank you for watching. I hope this walkthrough was useful, and I'll see you next week for another revision video for your GCSE Spanish exams. Bye!